Everybody is back in front of their computers. I hope so. I still see 34 people there. Okay, Irene Reed has put on some more information about Dr. Murga and also some links. We will try and record that and also make sure that it's sent out afterwards again so that people can follow that up. Right, it is a great pleasure now for me to introduce Christopher Lloyd as our next speaker. He is an internationally known author, especially of non-fiction books, history, and other matters. These were recent publication about climate change, especially for younger readers, primary school readers, I would say. Although the little bit that I could see on the internet, it seems like enormous fun, so I'll definitely indulge. And he's in the country. He was at the Franschhoek Literary Festival. He's in Joburg at the moment, and at 12 o'clock he is actually taking part at a book festival at a school there, so he very kindly squeezes us in his program this morning, and we thank him very much. Exclusive Books has also given us a gift to give to him, and I hope that he's been able to use it well and that it won't tip the scales to the negative side for him when he has to go back to the UK. Mr. Lloyd, thank you so much for being with us today, and please, we're going to listen to you with great enjoyment.
Well, thank you very, very much, Conrad, and I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you. Any thumbs up or anybody want to write in the chat box? Everything's good. It's a great honor and a privilege for me to speak to kindred spirits, librarians. As Conrad said, I'm a non-fiction author. I come from the UK. And I've been writing books, I suppose, for about 15 years now. And I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes or so. I hope that's okay. And then that should leave a few minutes for some questions, because I'm hoping you'll have some questions and I can help out in the last few minutes of the talk. So I do have some slides. So I'm going to click on my presentation screen, and I'm hoping I'm going to click on the right buttons. And you might see the little title of my talk here, which is called The 5 Wows Developing a Lifelong Love of Learning. Perhaps, Conrad, can you confirm that you can see the screen okay?
I can see the screen okay, thank you.
Fantastic, great. So really, I want to take you on a slightly personal kind of story to start with, which is to do with an experience my wife and I had that kind of has defined and shaped my whole writing career ever since. And I'm sure I wouldn't be speaking to you were it not for this incident, nor would I be here in South Africa at these festivals. And I have the real pleasure to visit lots of places, or I certainly did before COVID, all over the world, which is, terrifically exciting. But this festival in Franschhoek and Kingsmead was delayed from 2020, and now they've revived them, and it's just wonderful to be back out again, speaking to people and having live audiences in schools and at festivals and so on. So this little incident occurred when my eldest daughter, Matilda, reached the age of 8. I've got 2 children, Matilda and Verity. They're now 26 and 24, so we are going back a little while. I'm not quite sure how that amount of time has passed so quickly, but still it has. When she was 8, she was a very precocious young person, loved reading. She loved going to school. The whole world was her sort of curiosity shop. It was absolutely brilliant just to be with her, really. But when she moved school groups from one year to the next, within about 3 or 4 weeks of this transition, her whole personality had begun to change. I can show you. There we are. There's Matilda. And she didn't want to go to school, and she was angry, and she was cross, and she was upset, and she didn't want to read, and she didn't want to take instruction, and she didn't want to get dressed in the morning because she didn't want to go to school, and she was cross with us because we were the ones sending her to school. And so we went to the teacher, and we said, "There's a problem. What's the matter with Matilda? She seems to have, got herself into a funk." And the teacher did and I have infinite respect for teachers, I really do, but as you will know as well as anybody that teachers are really judged by how many children they get through the tests. That's the culture we certainly have in the UK. And at the age of 8, they have to pass certain literacy and maths tests. And so she looked down at her test scores, and Matilda was doing fine. She was good at maths, she was good at reading. And what had happened was, just to cut a long story short, was that the teacher had in her own mind, if not even in reality, divided the class into 2 groups. Those that needed her help to get through the tests and those that didn't. And the ones that didn't need her help were being given mind-numbingly boring worksheets to do, really from the moment they arrived at school until the moment they went home. So as far as Matilda was concerned, as an individual, school really at that point had nothing to offer her, nothing to feed her natural curiosity at all. And that was at the heart of her sort of distress. As far as the teacher was concerned, she was doing fine because she was getting more children through the tests. So it's a classic example, really, isn't it, of where what's good for the institution or for the herd is not necessarily right for the individual. And we find that again and again in history and in everyday life. So the teacher told us not to fuss and everything will be fine. So did the head teacher. So we decided in the end we'd take her out of the school, try and find another school. We couldn't find anything close to where we live in Kent at that time that would really provide the creativity that I think Matilda really needed and wanted at that time. So we decided to step off the treadmill and educate at home. Now, in the UK, home education is really quite allowed, and it's built into the sort of responsibility that parents have to educate their children at home or otherwise at school, or otherwise I should say. We had no experience of it at all, and we thought in our arrogance that in 2 months we could do what it would take you 2 years to do in a school. It was just amazing. So we made one of our rooms at home into a schoolroom. We had a curriculum that we downloaded. We had lots of books. We had a timetable. We had some people to come in and help. We had a clock. We had a bell. Well, I'm not sure we did, but I think we may have done. And we thought it was fantastic. And I have to say, after 2 years of home education, the Lloyd household resembled the last scene of a play you might know of called Macbeth. Not Macbeth, Hamlet, even worse than Macbeth, actually. And there we are. You can see Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd on the floor there. Actually, that one, if you're Scottish, that's an illustration of the Glencoe massacre, and I think that's probably about sums it up as well. It was a catastrophe, and in our desperation, we sat down with Matilda, and we sort of said in a sort of anxious way, "Just tell us, what are you interested in?" And as I relay this story to you now, I think back and I think, why on earth didn't we ask that in the first place? We just spent all this time as adults telling her what we think she needs to know. How arrogant is that? I mean, how do we know what young people are going to need to know in 6 months, let alone 6 years or 16 years? Everything about the world is changing so fast. The main thing, and this is what I've realized ever since, is that they need to have a love of learning so that they can adapt, so that whatever the world throws at them, they approach new opportunities in the spirit of wanting to learn and find out more. Of course, we are born with that spirit of curiosity. It's something innate in us all. You can't imagine a baby born bored. I mean, that's not possible. If your baby wouldn't engage with the world, you would take them to the doctor and say, there's a problem with my baby. But if you get to the age of 8, 10, 12, 14, and a child says they're bored, more often than not, we say, it's okay, just pass the tests and you'll be fine. But actually, it's not okay, because boredom, I've discovered, is like, I think of it like a brain disease. It's not the way the brain is designed to be. The brain loves new information to come through your senses and process it and adapt to the world around you. Then you get a shot of joy every time you make a new connection. That's how the brain is supposed to be. If it's bored, it's shut down. It's early onset depression. And at least now we recognize that depression is a very serious mental illness. We mustn't condone boredom, however we organize our educational institutions.
Mr. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd, sorry to interrupt. Your slides are not moving forward. We still all see just the the 5 wows.
Ah, that is a problem. I wonder why that is then, because you're quite right.
Are you in presenter mode?
Yes, I'm in presenter mode, but if I come out of presenter mode, I don't know if that helps at all.
I see the one with Matilda now.
Okay, for some reason, when I go into full screen, obviously, it doesn't like it. So let me see if I can sort of increase the size of that screen. If I go back into presenter mode, let's see if it will work this time. It Do you still see Matilda, Conrad, or not?
Yes, we
And
do.
if I move forward, do you see the blood on the floor with Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd? It says getting it all wrong.
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. Right.
Just to check, did you share your screen as a window or as a screen?
I thought I did it as a window. So maybe if I stop presenting, and sorry about this, everybody, and if I try again, Heidi, you're there, aren't you, to guide
Yes.
me? And if I click a window or a tab.
So it doesn't give you the option of an entire screen.
Yes, it does entire screen.
Yes.
It does as
So
well.
let's try entire screen.
Let's try that. And then if I flip over, and if I now show you my screen, does that
There we go.
does that look more like Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd, who have just
Get on the floor.
spent 2 months co-educating their eldest child? I'm glad to hear it. I do apologize for the slight hiccup there. Anyway, thank you, Conrad, for pointing that out.
Sure.
I would have happily carried on in ignorance otherwise. So there we are. So we asked her, what are you interested in? Okay, and fortunately she told us she was interested in penguins. And I'm hoping now you can see some beautiful emperor penguins on your screen.
Oh, yes, you can.
Good news. So we went to London Zoo and we went to see the penguins, which are fantastic, by the way. Not as fantastic, of course, as the penguins you have in Boulders Bay, so we've discovered since then. And Matilda wants to do a project about where penguins come from. So we learned they come from Antarctica. We didn't know about the penguins in South Africa in those days. She discovers that Antarctica used to be on the equator, and the whole Earth was, all the land masses were joined together into a supercontinent called Pangaea. And then Antarctica's moved like a jigsaw puzzle piece all the way around the world to the bottom of the world. And then we discover how do penguins survive when it's so cold and they huddle in groups. And I say, well, here's a big group and there's a little group. Why don't we count the penguins? And then one penguin leaves that group and goes to another group. How many are left? And we start doing arithmetic. We do ratios. We do percentages. And then Matilda taps me on the shoulder and she says, hey, Dad, why did the penguin leave the big group and go to the little group? And I'm thinking to myself, that really isn't relevant. It doesn't matter, just do the maths. But she's not doing maths, she's doing penguins, and it matters. So I stopped myself and I said, well, maybe it was bullied or maybe it fell in love. I don't know. And before I knew it, she was doing her own creative writing story about why the penguin left the big group and went to the little group. And she wants to find out about ice, which is amazing because when you heat it up, it turns to water, then it disappears. It's like a conjuring trick. And we're doing our changing states of matter in our science. And then she wants to do stories about ice. And you may have heard this story about a ship that left Southampton in 1912. And they said it would never sink. So we learn about arrogance, and they didn't put enough lifeboats on board. And then, of course, the link with the ice is that it struck the iceberg, the Titanic, as you know, and 1,529 people lost their lives. And that's ironic. And we talk about irony. And then she wants to write poems about penguins and dance like a penguin, and all the skills you might want your young child to be able to improve their life skills, I discover can be learned through penguins. Now, this was a huge kind of eye-opener to me because what I realized was, of course, it isn't penguins. It was penguins for Matilda at that point in time. It's whatever you are interested in. So I became really passionate and fascinated about trying to understand this journey of how we can create environments and resources for young people that ask them that question, what are you interested in? That allows their natural curiosity to flow. Because in that way, they're going to want to read about stuff because they want to find out more to do with whatever they're interested in. And it seems to me that you can't detach the skill of, say, reading from the motivation about wanting to know about the world. And that's why nonfiction to me seems to be such an important ingredient in the whole sort of spectrum of opportunity when it comes to libraries, librarians, and schools. The other thing is, and why it's such a pleasure and a privilege for me to speak to librarians, is that the only place in a school that really asks the question, what are you interested in, is the library, is the librarian. It's the gift of the librarian to be the sort of central hub of that curiosity we're born with, so that children can go in different directions and they can find out about things and then let other people know what they've discovered. And then they can use their curiosity to drive their passion for learning and then become adaptable adults in the end, self-learning systems so that they can thrive whatever the future throws at them. Now, what I became particularly interested in is this thing. And this isn't something that's, I don't think, really covered so much in education professional development, perhaps, that teachers do. But to me, it seems to be the heart of the question, although that's probably not the right analogy. Certainly the brain of the question is, what is this thing in our heads and how does it work? And so over the last 10, 15 years, as I've been writing non-fiction books, I've been striving to try and write books that tap into the natural ways in which our brains have evolved to learn over millions of years. Because of course, we are the product of millions of years of evolution. We're not just humans, you know, we've come through an evolutionary line all the way from sort of, you know, flatworms in the sea 500 million years ago to you know, the first fish, to the first fish that came onto the land, through amphibians, through reptiles, through mammals. You know, there are traits of all these things in our genetics. And I think these things can be really fundamental to understanding how we can engage and motivate ourselves and our brains to maximize their potential. So there are 5 things that I briefly want to share in the sort of 15 minutes we have left. And they're all things that I've tried to make sure lie at the core of the resources and the books and the talks and the other opportunities that I've had to try and create a sense of wonder about the world we live in, a way for the curiosity to flow as if it's like electricity around a circuit. And I want to very briefly just share these 5 with you. And it's all based around the reward system that our brains have inherently, that is the product of all these millions of years of evolution. This little drawing here is actually of Caldi. I don't know if you know the story of Caldi, the story of the goat herder who was in Ethiopia, who saw his goats leaping around with joy, and he realized that the reason they were so joyful is because they'd been munching these red berries. So he thought, well, I'll have a go. And he had some munch these red berries, and he started leaping around with joy. And in the distance were these monks, and they noticed this goat herder leaping around with joy. And I said, how come you're looking so cheerful? He said, well, you've got to try these red berries. They're amazing. So they did, they ground them up, and they were the first people, it is said, to be brewed coffee. So there we are, going back 1,000 years. But this is the idea. How can we create a joy of learning? How can we try and make sure that whatever we do in our libraries, in our classrooms, at our homes, that young people have the privilege of sort of saying, wow, when they go to school, so they're discovering something new. Because the brain loves making connections. And the more and more I sort of experience spending time with children, and the more I try and encourage educators to think about making connections, not dividing things into different subjects necessarily, or dividing things into A to Z or whatever it is, but let's make connections, because when we make a connection, the brain has an automatic little trigger of joy. It's a chemical called dopamine that's part of our reward system because it learns something new. When it learns something new, it can adapt and it can survive better in the environment around it. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find out what is it that makes our brains go, wow. And these 5 things, I think, are really fundamental to trying to create that environment of wonder and curiosity. The first is about recognizing that the brain is in 2 hemispheres, as you can see from the picture here. And as you probably know, a lot of science has shown that the left and the right hemisphere do different things. And they do different things. It's quite important to understand, I think, and to recognize their differences. They do different things for a very important reason. We're creatures with eyes, and it goes back, I think, at least 500 million years ago to the first trilobites, the creatures that developed eyesight. And if you are a creature with eyes, you need to have 2 brains. And I think it's very useful to think of humans as not having 1 brain, but having 2 brains. The left side of the brain, which happens to be responsible for the right side of the body, is responsible for really targeted, precise manipulation and problem solving and specific things that are going on right in front of it. In a biological sense, that might be about trying to find out where your food is going to be for your next lunch. You're not thinking about anything else. You need to make sure you get your food. In an educational sense, it might be using your hand-to-eye coordination to be able to write with a pen, or solving a complex maths problem, etc. A lot of our education system is geared towards that precise world of problem solving, which is the left side of the brain. The right side of the brain is often ignored in education, and I think this impoverishes the potential of our brains. It also prevents us from going, wow, because the right side of the brain isn't interested in something straight in front of you. It's interested in the big picture. It's interested in finding out everything that's around it, not what's straight in front. And it's very important, because if you're a creature in the wild, you need to make sure that if you're finding your lunch, you don't become somebody else's lunch at the same time. And if we didn't have 2 senses of consciousness driven by our 2 brains, we wouldn't have survived in the wild. In this case, we got a sparrow and an eagle. Imagine the sparrow has just grabbed a seed off the beach. That was its breakfast, and it has to coordinate its own body movements with where the seed is and work out where it is against the background of the pebbles, and then swallow it and do all those kind of focus things. If at that time an eagle's flying overhead and its shadow passes over the sparrow, luckily the sparrow's got its right side of the brain that's plumbed into its fight or flight instincts, its hormones, and it notices that shadow and it flies away before it becomes the eagle's breakfast. Now, it would not survive without having those two senses of consciousness. So for children, we love to see the big picture. You take a child to the top of a mountain. You've been to the top of a mountain yourself. Go up to Table Mountain like I did when I was in Cape Town last week, and the view is just amazing. What do you say? You say, wow, look at this. Look at the stars at night. Look at the ocean. You see, we get a shot of joy when we see the big picture. That's the right side of our brain being fed with something that it responds to in a really positive way. So how do we do this in education? We've got to make sure we see the context. We've got to make sure we present things in a way that allows you to make connections, to say, wow. And I'll try and give you an idea of how I've tried to do this, certainly, just towards the end of the talk. The second thing is, I think it's really important to remember that it's not just our brains we're feeding our hands. And our hands are really part of our brains. When our ancestor, Lucy, 3-4 million years ago, got up onto 2 feet. Her descendants used their hands to manipulate the world, to make spears and bows and arrows and light fire. And the ones who used their hands to best effect were the ones that survived. So it's not a surprise that our brains have grown bigger, partly because we've got much better hand-to-eye coordination skills than our closest relatives, say chimpanzees. And that when we use our hands, we get a shot of joy, a shot of reward from our brains, because of course, that's how our ancestors survived in the wild, by using their hands effectively. Now, in education, particularly in primary schools, there is often a lot of craft, a lot of using your hands, but then we kind of forget about it. And we think the only important thing is to do literacy, or to do reading, or to do maths, or whatever. But using our hands is fundamental to creating joy in the mind. If it was your birthday and I'd known you very well, and I gave you a beautiful vase made out of pottery that I painted myself, and I put at the bottom of it, to Heidi, with love from Chris, because we've known each other, Heidi and I, for a long time, okay? And I give it to Heidi. It's a very special thing. She can put a flower in it and put it on her mantelpiece. There we go. If it was Heidi's birthday, and instead of giving her a beautifully handmade vase, glazed and with love from Chris on the bottom, instead of that, I gave her a plastic Evian mineral water bottle, an empty one, she wouldn't go, wow. She wouldn't put it on her mantelpiece. It's just as good as holding a flower with water in, but it doesn't have my hands. It doesn't have that sense of joy, because I've used my hands to make something myself. We must remember this, I think, all the way through, in our libraries, in our schools, all the way through high school, all the way into life. I can't talk without waving my hands around, because they're connected to everything I'm saying. That makes us go, wow. It's important to remember, thirdly, that we are a visual species. And sometimes we can lose sight of this, perhaps in our anxiety to make sure children learn to read through the written word. But bear in mind, written word is very recent in biological history, for most of human history, and certainly for all our antecedents in the genetic line that we have traveled. There are no written words. Things are learned through pictures and through sounds, particularly for mammals. And so therefore, it's not a surprise when you open a book and we've trained somebody to read. What does their brain do? Their brain turns the words back into pictures. And we have a word for it. It's called the imagination. And that's why it's called an imagination. It's an image. When we go to bed at night, our memories and our experiences, they're all processed into pictures. We call them dreams. Most people don't dream in numbers, and they don't dream in words, because the brain is essentially a text to image converter. It's going to convert whatever we force it to have to be able to do, like read or do maths, it converts it into pictures. And of course, the ancient Greeks didn't do maths with numbers. They did it through geometry. They did it through pictures, because that's the natural state of the brain. So I mention this because I think that with all kinds of literature, the supporting environment of providing powerful artwork and visualization is a key ingredient to motivating people into reading. So I remember that very much. The fourth one, this is Archimedes. He's just leapt out of the bath when he's discovered how to prove that the king's crown is made of gold. And he's charging down the street shouting, "Eureka, Eureka," because he's discovered something other people do not know. And I've realized now that over many thousands of years, if you imagine, if we go back to a time when adults were in the Stone Ages, they were in a group of maybe 20 or 30 nomads. They have some children, they have some grandparents, they have people of all ages there, and they're moving from place to place. If a young child, aged 5 or 6, discovers a source of fresh spring water, imagine how popular or proud the others in the group are going to be, because then that group can settle there. So they go back with a piece of information and they tell the others in their group, and everybody is thrilled with them, and they get a huge shot of joy because they have found out something other people don't know. When children in school, traditionally what happens is they're the ones who don't know anything, and all they can do is get something right or wrong. It isn't motivating. If you say to a child, "What are you interested in?" They become an expert in something, they come back to school and tell you something you don't know, then that's a moment to celebrate. The child's confidence is boosted. You mean to say you don't know? And that's brilliant. No, I had no idea. Suddenly they feel special. They've got something. They want to talk about it. Their public speaking is improving. They feel as if they're special, and that gives them the motivation to want to find out more. Wow. And finally, human beings can't help but love choice. And I think this is what's so wonderful about a library, of course. You're presented with all this choice. If you went into a library and there were only 3 books, or if you went into a supermarket, imagine going to Woolworths, and all they're selling is flour, rice, and toilet paper, you're not going to go in and say, "Wow." But if they've got 30,000 things on offer, that's what you're going to say, because your brains love choice. Because if brains love through trial and error, they learn through trial and error, rather, they can't learn if there's no choice. So I think building choice into the diet of education for young people is absolutely the heart of creating an experience that can allow the natural reward system that we're born with to drive that curiosity-led learning forwards for young people. Now, I can see I've got like 3 or 4 minutes just to wrap up. I'm hoping I haven't gone too fast. I hope it makes some sense. That's a little summary of my own personal experience of working with young people. But I've also been trying to create books and resources and techniques for young people, parents, and educators that sort of take these ideas and turn them into something that can be useful for young people, their parents, and their educators. I'm going to whiz through this because I haven't got time really to talk about that, but I will talk about timelines. Now, first book I wrote was a giant big history of the world from the beginning of time to the present day, because I wanted to connect knowledge together. I didn't want it to be divided into different subjects. And it was called What on Earth Happened? And it was published by Bloomsbury in 2008. I was very fortunate that it did well. I sold lots and lots of copies in different languages. And I found myself going to lots of schools to do lectures, but I only had a giant brick of a book to offer to a 10-year-old. And that really wasn't the right kind of thing. So I used the proceeds of that book to set up my own little nonfiction publishing company, which is called What on Earth Books. And here we are 12 years later, and we have 2 imprints, What on Earth Books and Britannica Books, because we now do all the Britannica books for young people. I wanted to find a new way of engaging with the big picture, but that would be accessible to an 8, 9, 10-year-old. And so I started working on timelines, and there are lots of traditional timelines like the Bayer Tapestry, or here you can see the Codex Xuxnatl from the Aztec world. I created one from the beginning of time to the present day. I should imagine you can only see the slides. I don't know if you can see me as well, but it unfolds. It's called a wall book, and you can turn the pages like normal, but you can unfold it like a giant timeline, which it is, and it tells the story of natural history to the present day in 12 different colored streams, which are chapters really, and then at the bottom is a timeline that's logarithmic, so 1 centimeter at one end, it gives you 1 billion years. By the other end, 1 centimeter is 5 years, and it changes scale, so therefore you can include the few thousand years of human history as well as the billions of years of natural history all on that same infographic. The different colors represent different parts of the world, so you can see what's happening in Europe at the same time as Africa, at the same time as Asia, at the same time as the Middle East and America. And it makes a fascinating way of saying to a child, what are you interested in? Because they're all going to go in different directions. Some will like dinosaurs, some will want to find out about South Africa, some might want to find about Copernicus or Newton or the Industrial Revolution or the Second World War. That's great, because then they can link off and they can find what else is happening and become experts in all those sorts of things. It also gives them the big picture. You open it all up and what do they say? Wow, because the right side of our brain is really interested in trying to see the context. Another technique that I've been using this in my talks here over in South Africa, is to try and associate key moments in history or in science with everyday objects that happen to be in the classroom or in perhaps a child's home or bedroom. And I use a storytelling coat so that I can travel around and be interactive, and I get the children to volunteer to pick my pockets. And inside my pockets is an object. It might be something as simple as a bottle of water. And I say, this is the most amazing thing you'll ever see when you pick my pocket. Number one, they pick out a bottle of water. And of course, there's a sort of nervous giggle, say, well, that's not very interesting. And then I get them to imagine they've been in a desert for 3 days. They've drunk nothing. And then they're so exhausted that they can't even move. Now imagine when you pick pocket number one, how it would be. And they pick it and they realize that this amazing substance is the difference between life and death. And that we're all basically bags of water. And that's why there isn't any life on the moon or on Mars, because there's no water. And how special everyday things really are. And that's, I think, what we lose sight of as adults. We tend to think things are ordinary just because we're used to them. We normalize things. We shouldn't normalize anything. And nothing should be normalized for young people, because everything is extraordinary. And that, to me, taps into this sense of wonder about the natural world, which I try to explore through these 5 wows of giving them choice, of trying to make sure that they can discover things other people don't know, of making sure that the world that we're offering them isn't just full of written words, but is highly visual with the words supporting. So we've got the motivation of visualization to feed their curiosity, to make sure they're using their hands, which is why all my books are really primarily used through illustration and drawing and art rather than photography. And finally, by trying to present the world in context so they can see the big picture. So I'm going to stop talking, because as you can tell, I could carry on talking all day, and I would get in big trouble with Conrad for that. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm hoping that I return as a sort of real live human being in front of you. And I'm here to answer any questions or suggestions or complaints or whatever else you may have. Here I am, and thank you anyway for bearing with me for these last 30 minutes.
Oh, Chris, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Very inspirational. I think we must definitely, your company must probably invest in distributing those cloaks of yours with objects in the pockets. That will be very
storytelling codes. Great. Every librarian needs a storytelling code. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think Rose and I must definitely budget for that. We have to hand in our budget for next week already. So yeah, we'll put that on the list. Right, there's a compliment from Irene Reed. You're amazing and totally inspiring. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think there's a general agreement on that. I've just looked on Amazon at your books, and there are very few on Kindle as far as I can see. I will have to dig deeper.
Yes. I mean, the thing about Kindle is that, of course, illustrated children's books is not really the perfect medium for that. My first 2 books of Bloomsbury are on Kindle, but I tend to also, I'm passionate about the printed word and reflected light, and about having the book in the hand, the whole smell of it, the relationship between the child and the printed word, to me, seems to be something that's more important than ever, really, in a very, very screen-based world that we're in now. So I'm not at all upset if you didn't find too much on Kindle.
Yeah, well, something that I picked up somewhere is that reading a physical book contributes to the sense of space, and you remember better because you've got a more spatial feel for where you've read something which is totally lost on an electronic device.
Actually, Conrad, on that theme, there's some really interesting research about the type of vocabulary that's used when it's specifically created for the printed word as opposed to on screen. And it was at the University of California, and they identified the 1,000 most common words in the English language, and then they analyzed lots of text that have been written for the screen versus those that have been curated in print, and discovered that there's the really big difference in the sophistication of the vocabulary used for text that's written specifically for print. Because when we're printing something, we're thinking about the space we've got. We're thinking of our vocabulary and how we can use one word to, rather than 3 words, perhaps. And somehow there is a more sophistication in print than there is in the screen world. And I think that's really important when it comes to trying to encourage children to have a good vocabulary so they can express themselves, so they can be creative, things that are fundamental really to their well-being, you know, for the rest of their lives.
Excellent. Kim van der Merwe says here, also, thank you. I'm going to share this with our staff if this is allowed.
Your answer. I will be thrilled, of course. Yes,
fantastic. Well, you know, often at previous librarians conferences, we've said that, you know, so many more people from a staff should be here, should be listening to what we're listening to, because, you know, of the integration and the support that we can give them. Okay, there are some more comments from Melissa. Okay, these respond. Thanks. Yeah. Oh, by the way, yes, somewhere it's mentioned that your books have been translated into a number of languages.
Yes.
I'm interested in doing an Afrikaans translation.
Oh wow, that would be amazing.
I don't know whether that's possible, but we'll need to see whether we can find a publisher here.
We've got so many fantastic publishing partners in different countries, and here we are. That's what you need. That's an email address, and we've just sold. I've just done. Was my lockdown project. Was doing the Britannica All New Children's Encyclopedia: What We Know and What We Don't. And Britannica haven't done a children's book for 20 years. You all know the Britannica brand, obviously, from encyclopedias. And they went online in 2012, everything on the screen. They realized that actually for children's nonfiction, they've missed a big opportunity, because in a world of fake news, you know, Britannica brand has got something really powerful and important to offer, because it can be trusted and it's really verified. So I teamed up with them 3 years ago to create a new imprint Britannica books. And our first title was this encyclopedia. And there are two things different about it, which I just love to share quickly. One is it isn't A to Z, because the brain isn't divided into A to Z any more than it is in different subjects. It's 8 chapters through a journey through the history of the world, from the beginning of time to the present day. 4 chapters natural history, 4 chapters human history. And that way you can accommodate all information. If you like robots, it's chapter 8. If you like trees, it's chapter 4. If you like volcanoes, it's chapter 2. It's just another way of making a more intuitive version of how we organize information, I think. The second thing, we called it What We Know and What We Don't. And it seems to me that many of the most important questions we don't know the answers to. So why don't we do an encyclopedia where we look up what we don't know? And suddenly I realized, actually, this is a really interesting idea. And we just started off the Britannica Encyclopedia of the Unknown. And throughout this book, we have these boxes called Known Unknowns. And we want kids to try and just be awe-inspired by the fact there are so many things experts don't agree on, so they have to make their own opinions. There are so many things we don't know the answers to, so that might inspire them to want to find out the answers themselves. And we profile the experts in the encyclopedia throughout the book, so they're not just footnotes, they become role models, people who really use their curiosity to develop a passion for something in the real world around them and wanting to share that with other people. There was a reason why I got onto the subject of that, and it was something to do with something you asked me, Conrad, and I can't quite remember what it is, but there we go. I hope some of that is relevant to everybody in the room.
I think we'll both have to go back to the recording.
Oh yes, you are mentioning, that's what it was when you said about Afrikaans. So this is now available in 20 languages, which is amazing, and the most recent one is in Moldova. Can you believe it? Despite what's happening in Ukraine, the Moldovan publishers have got in touch with us, and they're now translating and publishing the Britannica Encyclopedia so that their children, you know, get a balanced overview of what's happening, and they're not so vulnerable to many of the tides of sort of trauma that are happening in the world around. And I was very uplifted to know that they wanted to despite the difficulties of today, publish the book in Moldovan. So obviously Afrikaans, that would be might give me a good excuse to come back to South Africa. Not that I say very much in Afrikaans, but anyway, I think that would be fun.
Definitely. Irene Reed asks whether the encyclopedia is for sale in South Africa. I wonder whether
it's for sale. It's distributed by Jonathan Ball Publishers.
That's what I would have guessed.
Enough lovely things about them. They've been so good to me. I've done 22 events in the last 12 days. So, they do make me sing for my supper, but they do give me a very good supper as well. So it's a nice symbiotic relationship.
You sound like a working royal.
Yeah, I wouldn't wish it upon myself, that one. But and then exclusive books, all the normal places you'd expect to find it online, of course. What's it called? Take a Lot. Yes, we don't have that one, but Take a Lot. You can get it on there.
Right. Oh, that's the distributor. Loot.
Yes.
Loot has it. Rose has just shown me. Loot, which is an online bookshop.
Good.
Yes, and you mentioned Jonathan Ball. I have to say, Rose has been working with their representatives. She's given me the names here. Jennifer Ball and Mika.
Mika's here. She's amazing.
Okay, yeah, no, they've been.
You want to be glad.
Yeah, they've just been so supportive and responsive, and their organizational input has made your presence here possible today, and we're very pleased that you also allowed for an extra moment on your calendar. I'm very aware of the time as well, because you're supposed to start.
Well, actually, Conrad, to be fair, I don't think this talk is until 1 o'clock. So I'm
okay.
I'm not about to sort of expire or disappear in a cloud of smoke.
You're not going to be beamed up or anything.
No, none of that. No.
Okay, good. Yes. Is there anything else that anybody would like to say or ask? Sorry. Melissa says, I really think igniting the learner's natural curiosity in the classroom would be a great tool to catch up in this race of learning loss.
Melissa, I couldn't agree more. And we should be finding ways of tapping into natural curiosity anyway. We just, I find it very frustrating that so many schools are still locked in a very Victorian mindset, whereby making connections, appealing to the child's individual interests, encouraging them to become experts, encouraging them to share what they've learned with their peers and their parents and their grandparents. It's common sense. It's not like sort of rocket science. It really isn't. But, and you guys as librarians, you're in the best place to make that happen. Dare I say it? Because, you're in that one space. What are you interested in?
Yeah, our school has put up a building recently called the eSTEAM Center. Now, eSTEAM comes from STEM and STEAM.
Yes, of course.
We've added entrepreneurship into the whole mix.
Wonderful. Brilliant.
So it is that attempt of breaking down some of the silos.
Yes.
It's interesting sometimes, though, how to see how people don't really get, it's not something that you can examine. It's not something you can get marks for, but we feel that it is hugely important that they have that cross-curricular, integrated, practical approach. You see people taking a plastic bottle and making a water filter out of it and that kind of thing. So, it teaches us a lot, actually, and it taps into what many of us actually know all along. But I think you've referred to something in the UK system with what you told us about your daughter. That whole thing of being so test driven and results driven and outcomes based, and I don't know what, it takes away the joy, the wow of learning. And
if the challenge now is to try and re-engage children who've been affected by COVID with that wow of learning, we're not going to do it by drilling and killing. I mean, that is just the last thing they need. They need something motivational. So, funny enough, during lockdown, that occurred to me a lot. So, I've just launched a monthly magazine for kids, non-fiction, printed with Britannic Direction, and it's just non-fiction. The whole thing comes through their letterbox every month, and the idea is that they will go wow on every page. And I think this type of thing for kids to take home, to be able to, that isn't as intimidating as picking up a book. It's a magazine. It's like, it's something you can dip in it, but it's full of words, and it's full of pictures, and it's full of stuff they're going to talk to their friends about and their parents about. And it's even got a jokes page at the back, because, our brains love making connections. Did you hear the one about what do you call a teacher who's always late for school? Mr. Bus. Yeah. Okay, well, there's lots more like it. And our coach said it says she's May and she's 9 years old. So, there's a way of empowering kids with the written word through printed media that they can share, that I think is a really key way of, and this magazine is available in South Africa. So you can go to britannicamagazine.com and you can subscribe. It takes a little longer because we have to post it from the UK, but it should arrive fine. And we're hoping very much to find a distributor here locally, because we're at the beginning of our journey, but just in case.
I don't know whether Jonathan Ball would want to distribute magazines, but
well, they do have. There's a sister company, part of Media 24, that does exactly that. So
okay.
I have my fingers crossed.
Right, Irene, there's your answer about how to subscribe. Britannica.com,
Britannicamagazine.com,
britannicamagazine.com.
or .co.uk. They both go to the same place. Thank you. And it's very simple. You can subscribe in a few clicks, and then you will get it every month. And hopefully you'll find lots of things in there that will be useful, particularly in a library setting, where you've got that liberty to infect them with that love of.
That magazine taps into what I often say, because I'm an Afrikaans teacher as well.
Yes.
And when people say, especially English-speaking people, how can my child improve his Afrikaans? My answer is always, reading is the panacea, the thing. But many people think, they must read a book. But as you say, a book is often too intimidating.
Particularly post-COVID, picking up for a lot of kids is a stretch.
So I actually also wish that something like what you publish there can also be in not just Afrikaans, but many other South African languages, or other languages all over the world, because it gives that the pictures obviously makes it wonderful, and it's brief and it's interesting, and
it's good. We try and include as many different topics in every issue, whether it's space or animals or nature.
Even better.
It's basically saying, what are you interested in?
Yeah.
And if you as a librarian are able, you find a child who might be a reluctant reader or whatever, engaging with that magazine, and you find out what is it that they love, and they tell you, well, I'm really interested in space, or I'm really interested in weird animals, or I really love to find out amazing things that have happened in April in the past or whatever. Then you can guide them to a place in the library that they've discovered their own interest. They may not even have known it themselves, let alone be able to tell you. But through the magazine, they can express themselves, and with the right guiding hand, then they can go to a book to find out more about that. Yeah. And suddenly they're in and they're off. And that curation and that sort of being there for them on an individual level is so important. Really is the most amazing job you all do.
Okay, the question here is, what age group is it aimed at, the magazine?
Well, I say tongue-in-cheek 6 to 106, because really parents and grandparents do enjoy this as much as parents, but I would really say 7 to 14, and originally I thought 7 to 12, but I've been told by a lot of teachers in the UK that at Key Stage 3 they have a tremendous challenge trying to engage some children in reading, and that they're finding for 13, 14-year-olds it's just the perfect way of sort of being able to give them something not threatening and comfortable and exciting to sort of get them going again.
And there's also something that you said that links up perfectly with the previous speaker who spoke about the backlog in South African education because of the pandemic. Yeah. And one of the things we've been discussing briefly was the involvement of parents, and how parents can still lengthen the school day without lengthening the school day, or lengthening the learning day at least. And as you said, if children read about things in the magazine and they're excited about it, then it's something they can speak to with their parents.
Yeah. It is, and a conversation. I mean, just to finish off, the book that I've been giving most of my talks this tour is one on climate change called "It's Up to Us," and the whole aim of that is to try to give children an overview of what we've done to nature and why it's a problem for the planet, and how we might be able to try and fix it, so that they can have a conversation with the adults in their lives, because there's a bigger chance, I think, of a positive impact in the long term through children influencing adults, rather than all the time the message going to adults saying, you've got to change your lifestyle, you've got to make sure you put planet before profit, you've got to, adults are kind of set in their ways, aren't they? We all know that. Children have the curiosity, they haven't made up their minds, but they can ask pertinent questions of their parents and grandparents and their teachers. How many of your schools have solar panels? And if they don't have them, why don't they have them? And if it's too expensive, why don't you get the kids to help raise some funds and involve the parents? And then you can measure how much sunlight is turned into electricity every day, so you're not putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Then you can do a bar graph, and then you can put it into your maths lessons, and they're engaged across the curriculum in being the change. And that's the opportunity, really, that and they'll want to read about it too, of course they will.
Yeah, it's stepping into the excitement and the enthusiasm.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. At our school, we have a senior school and a prep school, but at this we have a whole school sustainability committee looking at what the school does and on the campus and so on. And over and above, you know, the business manager and the heads and the board, there's a board member usually, and teachers and so on. We also include some of the high school students.
Oh, fantastic.
We bring them on, and they sometimes ask very pertinent questions.
Oh, good. And don't forget the primary school students. You know, human beings reach peak curiosity at about age 9, in my experience.
No, the prep school has got a very strong echo group going, and they do all kinds of very exciting things. You know, over the 2 schools, for example, recently we've sent 250 kilograms of bottle caps for recycling, and the money goes to a charity.
Oh, that just sounds fantastic. You can't do enough of that, Conrad. Brilliant.
Right. Okay. Well, people. It's after 12 already. We said we aimed to stop at 12 o'clock, and we still have some prizes to hand out and so forth. So at this point, Chris, thank you so